Hello, my name is Evie and welcome back to Overwatch Everyday. I have a little bit of a different episode for you guys. This is actually a cut from a stream that I did back in May where I go through every single hero in the game and I talk about what kind of value that they can find and provide to their team throughout every game that they could end up in. It's a little bit of a different video and there's not too much gameplay going on throughout, but I feel like this concept is going to be very, very helpful for a lot of people who are looking to develop their knowledge of the game or their hero pools, or just generally understand their own heroes better. So with that out of the way, I am going to be looking to stream more of these types of concepts in the future. So be sure to follow the Twitch or YouTube, and let's get into the video. Faces. Hi, Evie, do you have any one-trick Zenyatta advice? Your positioning is everything. The only two things that you're really going to need to worry about and grind is going to be your positioning and your mechanics. If you are able to hit the shots that you need to hit and position yourself in a way that you will die as little as possible, those are the two things that you want to max out. So what I recommend, focus on thinking about what's going to kill you. What are the threats to your hero? And then run away from them. And then anytime there's not a threat, you want to be taking space that you can and then playing for your mechanics. Okay. But let's get into putting things on this little tier, or this little triangle thing. First thing that I'm going to start with probably is Bastion. He's going to go quite a bit into raw numbers. There is basically no utility of Bastion, maybe like a tiny bit of disruption. And there's a really important thing that I want to kind of mention as I get into placing each hero on the chart. Is a lot of this is just straight somewhat subjective, or a lot of logic is arguable. So while I place someone on a specific area of this triangle, a different player would maybe put it in a different spot, or say, I think actually most of Bastion's value comes from their mobility, and since they have two nades and they're able to, or with the two nade perk, you're able to get around the map really quickly. And I'm like, yeah, that's a way to look at it. That is a source of value that you can get. But majority of fights and what Bastion is so capable of comparative to the rest of the hero cast is they just do damage. They just fucking hurt, man. When they're in that form, there's the only hero I think that does more damage per second in a base kit is Mauga, I think. Do you think the most value on... Do you think to get the most value for your account, you should focus on the hero that can cover the most amount of the points, utility, mobility, and raw numbers? I'm actually going to talk about that for a bit, but those are going to be the kind of hyper generalist heroes, or heroes that are able to flex a lot. So actually, with that said, I'm going to be putting our first hyper generalist on the point, and I actually want to make a full video about this hero. But Kiriko, and why Kiriko is so damn good all the time, is because they do fucking everything. They're able to heal comparatively to a lot of the other supports. They're going to be able to heal quite a bit. They have utility with their Suzu. Their ultimate ability is insane. Teleport is really amazing. Mobility as well as their wall climb. And then they can spec all of their perks into different corners of this. So her perks being Urgent Care, Fortune Teller, Ready Step, and Foxtrot. All of these do very different things. Where Fortune Teller is going to increase your raw number. Nobody picks Urgent Care. It's kind of useless. Ready Step is going to allow you to spec more into the raw numbers as well, but Foxtrot is going to let you spec a lot more into the mobility, or not it will let you spec more into the mobility and the utility of providing speed boost for yourself and teammates, which is really strong. Kiriko can do kind of anything, and that's why you'll see them so prevalent in a lot of metas, because they're able to fill a lot of niches and excel in a lot of different categories of the game, or find a lot of different value in different circumstances. So my Overwatch to win, gotta stay locked in. But stay locked in, bro. You're gonna win your next games. Yeah, Kiriko is just a Thanos of Overwatch because they can do literally everything, and it's circumstantial of what's going to be the most valuable for your team. Sometimes you're going to need to just stack on your team, hold your Suzu because they have like an Ana, or they have something that's going to, like an Ash, or something that's going to set you on fire or put a negative effect, which would be really, really bad for your team. So you're going to want to spec into the utility of Suzu, or sometimes you're going to be wanting to use your mobility to go on some longer flanks, help your tracer on angles, whatnot. And then other times you're just going to be heal botting. Kiriko can do anything, and it makes it really, really, really strong. Or one of the most important aspects of Kiriko is recognizing exactly where each hero kind of goes, or what utility you can be playing for. Not utility, what value source you can be playing for in each game. I moved it up a bit. I didn't mean to do that. Oh, I can make it bigger though. That'll be helpful. Bang. Okay. Moving on to our next one. I'm gonna be putting Jetpack Cat on here. I know I was gonna do a layer for each role, but I think that's kind of hard. But I can do a layer for. I can categorize them later. Jetpack Cat is going to be having, okay, low key they have a few too many raw numbers. Their healing is a little bit insane with Per being able to, I'm gonna go in practice range actually because I want to be able to take a look at some of the numbers. Yeah, I'll do a layer folder pretty soon. Jetpack Cat is mainly based around their mobility and their utility, with their lifeline being able to give their mobility to other people, which is insane. It's a really, really fundamentally strong like ability. Giving any other hero in the game the mobility of your yourself as Jetpack Cat is insane. That's why Cat Bastion is so strong, because now with the Cat Bastion combination, you're able to take a look. You're able to give this guy who specs mostly into raw numbers the mobility to just walk around anywhere that they want on the map. So you're going to have your value source of your raw numbers is going to be way easier to play for based off of mobility. Because how hero balance works, if anyone is able to excel at all of these, they're going to be generally fairly strong. So how you want to be balancing your heroes is you want to make sure that not every category is like completely maxed out. So you'll have heroes that are good at kind of everything, either be kind of very, very coin flippy, in which they're going to be, I'm going to make this borderless window. Oh, it already is. Heroes that can kind of do everything are going to be either really, really, really strong and really overpowered in a lot of areas like Kiriko is, or you're going to have heroes that can kind of do everything, be really, really weak, and make it very difficult to find value consistently, because you'll just get outclassed in most of the areas that you would need to play. Kiriko does not get outclassed because her numbers are just kind of good, but as soon as Kiriko's numbers are weaker at all, she'd be a very, very, very weak hero. Because if her damage is a little bit less, then it'd be like, okay, then why don't you just play like a Juno or something, who's just going to be able to heal more and have like somewhat comparable levels of like mobility and survivability. But since Kiriko can damage, they can heal, they have good utility, and all of them can kind of compare to the other roles in their class. It's going to be really, really strong. But a hero like who's another good example? Who can do it? Winston. Winston is another really good hyper generalist hero, and actually we'll put them on next. Winston is also going to be a bit more of a generalist hero who's going to be able to do a lot of these things. They have a decent bit of disruption, which will be their utility to kind of displace people, peel attention, but they're going to be leaning and speccing a bit more into the mobility comparative to a lot of the other tanks. Because they don't do a lot of raw number damage, they don't do a lot of damage, they don't have as much HP as a lot of other tanks, they're going to be finding a lot of their kind of value through their mobility. But that's not always the case, because sometimes they will be able to just raw stat check most of the cast. Winston will still have better raw numbers than like a Wrecking Ball or a Doomfist. If you put a bubble down on the cart, then a Wrecking Ball or a Doomfist don't exactly want to be brawling into that. They don't want to be fighting that raw number like stat check exchange, because they are going to be speccing even more into movement, which means that they're going to have a little bit, or they're going to be speccing more into movement and utility, which means that they won't be able to win that brawl consistently based off of Winston's numbers just being straight up better. So Winston is going to be a bit more of a generalist hero, but they're weak right now because their raw numbers are going to be too weak to compare to the rest of the cast, where a hero like Mauga is going to also have quite a bit of like raw numbers and mobility, though they're not going to be anywhere near as bad as Winston right now because they have the numbers to back up their kind of general playstyle. With Winston, one of the big issues right now is that anywhere they go, they are not able to get the value out of their mobility, because especially with Cat Bastion in the game, the Cat Bastion is able to chase down the Winston and blow them up because they won't have the numbers to fight anywhere that they actually are able to get using their mobility, and they don't have enough mobility to necessarily like escape or continue pulling resources into bad places like a Wrecking Ball does. Wrecking Ball doesn't have that much raw damage, but they're able to be enough of a threat to pull resources away from important spaces on the map and then use their mobility also to get out consistently. Winston does not have that level of mobility, but they're able to, like Winston, the reason why Winston struggles right now is because they're not excelling at anything exactly, and most of the time any value source that you'd want to play for, you could just do better on a different hero. So Winston's going to be in a generally weaker spot right now, and I'm a Winston one trick, don't get me wrong, that's like my guy, that's my guy. And I'm the first one to be forcing Winston in bad scenarios, but fundamentally how Cat Bastion works completely negates everything that Winston wants to do ever. Winston does not have the utility to deal with Cat Bastion. Winston does not have the mobility to outpace Cat Bastion. Winston does not have the raw numbers to actually fight Cat Bastion. No value source that you can play for as Winston will be viable into what's good right now. So despite Winston having the ability to play for a lot of things in a lot of different areas, I'm actually going to move them a little bit over there where everything will be shifting as time goes on. Even though Winston is able to be playing for a lot of different things in a lot of different matchups, they're weak right now because they don't have the raw numbers to back it up, unlike Kiriko, who has the raw numbers or the value of their utility to back up any value source that they'd really want to be playing for. But that leads me to a little bit more of specific or like specialized heroes who aren't going to be as like generalized as like a Kiriko or a Winston. I'm going to be going into Sombra here. Sombra is going to be playing quite a bit for their utility because they do not have the same level of mobility that like a Tracer has or a Genji or whatever. While they do have quite a bit of mobility, it's not going to be their inherent source of value because you only have one teleporter. If you get caught on the engage with your teleporter or the exit with your teleporter, you're just going to die, and you don't have the mobility necessarily to escape a lot of dangerous situations. But where Sombra excels is your ability to shut down people or kind of assassinate or deny a lot of plays that the enemy team would want to make with your hack, because hack is going to be one of the strongest utilities in the game because it just denies a lot of what other people would want to be playing for. If you get hacked by Sombra, you straight up can't play the game. You can't do anything, and it makes it so that you are not able to really, like, it's just the best denial tool ever. So when it comes to utility, you'll actually notice as we sort of talk a lot about and placing people on where their value sources lie in their kits, a lot of utility-based heroes are actually weaker right now in Overwatch 2 or 5v5 specifically, but you'll see a lot of the heroes that play for more utility be more applicable and more valuable and better heroes in 6v6 because there's another buffer to allow more utility-based heroes to require less self-sustain, as well as there's another target on the field for the enemy side to hit your utility onto. There's more happening on the field in 6v6 compared to 5v5, so utility to deny things from happening in the enemy team from doing things is more valuable because there's just generally more going on. So if you can deny anything that their team wants to do, not only do you stop a big snowball effect and their like huge pressure of like plays that they could make, but it also enables your team more because you have another hero on the field to just be straight up doing things. Utility is stronger in 6v6 comparative to 5v5 because there's just more heroes on the field, and it's really, really interesting. You can see it in, or my discovery of this in my 6v6 video that I had a few days ago where I played 6v6 for the first time and since Overwatch 1, and my discovery of this was actually really, really cool. My initial impression was that Sombra would be kind of like weaker because they wouldn't have as much space to maneuver on the field, but utility is just so much stronger in that format change. And that kind of leads me to another utility-based hero of Mizuki, where Mizuki is actually speccing quite a bit into the utility. They're going to be kind of like around the middle here where they have a decent bit of mobility. They're able to go for plays using their dash and their sort of recall. And they have pretty good damage as well. But the biggest thing and why you would be picking Mizuki over other heroes right now is their chain. The chain is a huge utility-based ability that will deny a lot of dive-based heroes. So anyone who wants to be speccing into the mobility value source on the triangle is going to have a hard time playing against Mizuki with their binding chain because it will be denying a lot of the value sources that your heroes would want to play for. This is why you'll see Mizuki being or feeling so strong into heroes like Tracer, WreckingBall, Winston, Diva. Any sort of dive-based or mobility-based heroes are going to be super shut down by Mizuki and their chain. But it does not do that much against heroes that spec into raw numbers because, okay, imagine you chain the Bastion, it's still gonna fucking shoot you. You're still gonna be Swiss cheese. It doesn't deny the damage necessarily, but it denies mobility, and mobility is fairly strong right now. So despite Mizuki having a little bit weaker numbers comparative to other supports right now, they don't do as much damage as like an Illari or a Wuyang. They don't do as much healing as I think anyone else. Or like Brigida, they have a very strong utility in that chain, which will still allow them to find value in game. And that leads me to Brigida. I don't have Brigida downloaded yet. So that leads me to maybe a more, another utility-based hero, but more speccing into numbers. Baptiste. Where Baptiste is not able to deny anyone as directly as like Mizuki can, because they don't have the chain necessarily. But I'm so sorry, Ash, I forgot to start recording. Can I be a part of the video? Yeah, you got it, Sam. You got it. Yo, thank you for the follow, Sam. And Nordkey. Sorry, quick chat break. My ADHD won for a moment. I just hit the record button, so maybe for the Rhine games it'll be okay. Locking back into the triangle for a little bit. Baptiste is going to be leaning a lot more towards raw numbers than Mizuki would, and they don't have as much mobility, only having their exo boots to really follow up on any plays that they want to be making. Makes it very difficult for them to be getting some value out of that mobility comparative to a lot of the other horizontal mobility like CDs that different heroes have. Baptiste is only going to be able to kind of like jump up and down. That's why you'll see a lot of pro players picking this rocket boots perk to allow Baptiste a little bit more horizontal mobility, as they're able to live and play to keep themselves alive and get more of their raw numbers in throughout the fight. But Baptiste still has quite a bit of utility and denial based off of their lamp. Lamp is going to be the immortality field, which will kind of deny a lot of huge bursty one-shot plays. Though as the game gets more and more spread out and more people and more heroes are leaning into the mobility value source, which is what is commonly referred to as mobility creep, where everyone has some kind of dash nowadays, it's harder to get value out of the immortality field because everyone's moving around all over the place. It's still a projectile. It's difficult to hit and difficult to lamp, but it's going to be like really, really hard to like keep everyone alive. While back in Overwatch 1, or in more brawl-based comms, the immortality field is going to get a lot of value because everyone is super, super stacked and you're getting more bang for your buck out of your utility or out of your immortality field. Everything, what I want to clarify with that, and we've been kind of like lightly like breezing over the topic as we've been going through this list, is these are just the value sources that each character wants to be playing for, and it's a good way to identify how you can kind of base your play style to maximize the value source of what your heroes is. And I want to mention again, all of this is kind of subjective. Every hero can find value in different ways. There's going to be someone who says like, I don't know, Mercy's damage, like Mercy's pistol is actually the best raw numbers in the game, so I'm just going to shoot everyone forever. Commonly, would I agree? Not really, but it is still value. What I'm trying to determine and how I'm determining where I place people on this triangle is based off of the most value that their kit has to offer and where the value source necessarily lies. So while Mercy can damage, yes, it's not going to be anywhere near as much value as her mobility could actually like provide, or raw numbers. What up, Milked? Quick question, Evie. What role do I main? I play every role in the game to a high level. Though I'm most known for my tank, especially the initiator heroes. Though I'm just generally most known for my tank, but I've played support in a semi-professional level. I've played DPS in a semi-professional level, and I regularly play tank in that field as well. So tank is probably the general heroes I have the most depth on, or the most depth of understanding on, at least micro-wise. My support is not far behind, and then my DPS, admittedly, my DPS lags behind a little bit. For context, I bounce between, or I can get up to like champ 3 consistently on tank and support. And probably I could get higher, but I straight up don't have the time because the queues start to get really, really long. But my DPS is only like around like mid champ, and sometimes I could scratch up to like champ 4 on like when I'm one tricking. But hyperflexing, I can usually just chill around champ, like high champ 5, low champ 4 on DPS. But my tank and support are usually better than that. It's mainly just my mechanics. I just don't have enough Kovacs hours. But I've coached other people up, or other DPS players like past like that champ 5, champ 4 level. I have an understanding of the heroes. I just don't have the raw hours and the mechanical skill to climb into the depths of champ on DPS. But locking back into the triangle a little bit here, I'm just kind of going through all of the heroes that I have saved already, and that way I don't have to download them. Ooh, this is an interesting hero that I think is actually really, really cool. Orisa is actually going to be a little bit more of a generalist-based tank, but they're going to be leaning a lot more, or a little bit more towards the utility and the raw numbers comparative to the mobility. While they still do have some mobility off of their spin, or off of their javelin spin. What was it actually called? Oh, it is called javelin spin. Let's go. It's not going to be nearly as like potent of a mobility cooldown as like Wrecking Ball in ball form, or like Winston Leap, or like Diva Fly, but it's still going to be a little bit of something. And that's why you'll see a lot of like pro Orisa players literally not picking their second perk of what's it called, Protective Barrier and Charged Javelin, because it's actually kind of a disadvantage in a lot of matchups to not be able to play for any form of mobility value like into a lot of different matchups. But if you do pick the Protective Barrier, or if you pick the Charged Javelin, the Charged Javelin isn't exactly that much value. Like technically it's more disruption and it's more utility. You can send people further away. It's not actually consistently that much value, and it's harder to hit because the speed of your javelin varies based off of how long you charge it for, which is fundamentally much more difficult to ingrain into your subconscious abilities, because projectile is already a really hard thing to hit mechanically, and a varied speed projectile is even harder. You have to now not only account for like just raw aiming, your raw mouse control, but now you have to be changing how far away your crosshair is from the enemy you're trying to shoot based off of how much you've actually charged the javelin. So a lot of pro players don't pick it because it's actually not that much value, but if you lock yourself into this Charged Javelin major perk, you cannot pick the shield perk. It's an opportunity cost. So what a lot of pro like sort of matchups kind of look like on Orisa, if one Orisa player picks a Charged Javelin, the other tank will swap off of whatever they were on onto Orisa and farm the second perk. That way, even though the Orisa who picked the Charged Javelin will still have their spin, they'll still have their javelin spin. In a lot of cases, now if the Orisa who just swapped picks the Protective Barrier, they'll be able to win more games because they're able to spec more towards the raw numbers of the shield. You're going to be able to just tank more and live more on the front line consistently with your shield perk, rather than if they had the spin ability. This is a little bit nuanced in how it actually goes in game. Why can sometimes I move it up and down and other times I can't? Oh well. It's a little bit nuanced sometimes in games where you'll see a lot of Orisas in the situation see like the enemy Orisa pick like the Charged Javelin, but they still won't pick shield, because if too many people on the enemy team are speccing into the raw numbers to the point where the Orisa picking the shield perk can't win anyways, then it's going to be rougher, because spin is not only a mobility cooldown, but it's also a utility because it has no limit on how much damage it can negate. It's like a Diva DM, which we'll get into in just a moment. So that matchup and sort of the Orisa mirror has a lot of depth in how you can actually be picking your perks and how you want to be playing, because Orisa's perks fluctuate their value sources more so than most of the cast in the game. It's why I don't think that it's the best designed major perk in the game. I think that it's actually definitely on the weaker side of like design-wise perks, because to have that big of a difference in where your value is coming from as a hero, I personally think kind of deviates from how perks should be, which is additions rather than changes to a base kit. Yeah, I'll lock the triangle layer. Not only am I a noob content creator, guys, I'm also a noob with computers. So Seraphy in the chat is like my Megamind nerd friend that helps me. I don't know how to lock it, bro. I've never had to lock it when I'm making thumbnails. There, found it, found the button. Okay. So Orisa, but overall, Orisa's base kit is going to be speccing a lot more into this raw numbers field. They're still going to have some utility with their disruption of their javelin throw and their javelin spin, and their gold being able to just kind of like body block people. Not as consistent a utility value source, but it's still something. But Orisa is going to be speccing more towards the raw numbers, so they are going to be a lot more of a generalist-based hero. We did Mauga, and now Diva. Diva, just like Kiriko, does it fucking all. The Diva just does it all, and that's why they're so prevalent and so dominant in so many metas. Because no matter what matchup Diva is playing into, since they can pull value out of all of these different sort of corners, they will have options on how they can be playing their matchups. So they have like default, like the 3 boosters of, or the 3-second booster, or 4 seconds now. 4 seconds boosters where they're able to just fly anywhere that they really want is going to be insane value with mobility. They're able to take a lot of angles comparative to, or a lot of space and a lot of angles quickly comparative to other tanks in the game because of that booster's cooldown. They're going to have the defense matrix, which not only is raw numbers, but it's also utility because you're able to deny a lot of big cooldowns. You're able to deny just a lot of different angles, as well as she fucking hurts, man. Half of her HP being armor, with the initiator perk previously as well, being able to regenerate what was effectively like 2.5 HP every like HP you would get because it's armor, was really, really, really strong, as well as you just have fucking damage. You're like damage per volley, 22 damage per volley is kind of insane. Like, I'm sure a lot of people have experienced like the sort of like combo of like the boosters damage, micro missiles, like cannons, and a melee to just like one shot a squishy. It's really, really, really strong. So Diva is able to pull value from a lot of different corners, and it's very hard to balance these kinds of heroes because, like you can see, even though Winston does similar things and they're able to pull different value from different corners, since Winston's numbers are a little bit weaker, they're going to be really rough right now and really hard to perform on. But Diva, since their numbers are a little bit better and a little bit stronger than a lot of others in the game right now, they're able to just be so dominant. And you'll see this in the meta history of pro play, where Diva was kind of like a troll pick for a while in Overwatch, or 5v5 in Overwatch 2. And they kept getting like buffed and buffed and buffed slowly but surely, and then it got to a point where some thresholds broke and they're able to consistently find value because their numbers were just good enough, and they already had the utility and they already had the mobility. But since they kept getting like better and better and better, and they just kind of like suddenly appeared and now are the most dominant and most prevalent tank in each meta for probably about the past year or so. Diva is insanely strong because they're able to pull from any value source that they want consistently, which other tanks would be forced to spec into one kind of play style. Like a WreckingBall can't like stat check any other tank in the game, but they're going to be able to play through their mobility and the utility, but they can get shut down easier by utility based heroes like Mizuki, and it makes it very hard for them into specific comps. But Diva is going to be good kind of fucking anywhere because Diva is able to pull from any sort of value sources. That's why you'll see me in my ranked lessons series saying sometimes heroes like Kiriko can just kind of do whatever they want. And it doesn't matter what my team picks, it doesn't matter what their team picks, and I'll still be able to like kind of carry on Kiriko and not think about it that much because they're able to pull from any different value sources. And if you're playing a hyper generalist hero like Diva or Kiriko like this, if you are able to recognize what is the most valuable aspect of your kit in each matchup and in each scenario, you can be a really dominant player on those heroes. But if you are going to be speccing towards one specific side of the triangle, then you're going to want to know, how can I consistently find my value from these roles? And that's what we're going to be doing later with Reinhardt. Do I have him downloaded? No, that would have been such a sick transition though. If I had Reinhardt's icon downloaded, could you imagine? Reinhardt is going to be speccing a lot more into the raw numbers. They're not going to have much utility. They're not going to have much mobility, but they are able to stat check most of the heroes in the tank cast and most of the heroes in the game. But they are very, very limited because they can only do that at such a close range. But I don't have their icon yet, and we're going to have to get to them a little bit later. But in the meantime, that also leads me to Mei, who is also going to be a fairly big generalist hero. Mei does not have the mobility of a lot of the other, very little mobility actually, but they are very, very balanced between their raw numbers and their utility, which allows them to be played in a wide variety of maps and places and with a lot of different comps. Mei is going to be a really good kind of hero, just kind of like slot into different places, because the noise are a bit distracting for me. Because Mei, with their spec into utility of their slow, like them being able to slow people down with their freeze as well as their wall and their cryo, they have a lot of self-sustain. So despite their lack of mobility, they're able to deny other heroes on the enemy team from getting value out of their mobility, because it's way harder to play for mobility when you're literally slowed down. She straight up has the utility to take away others' sort of like free flowiness and control of the map using their mobility CDs, as well as they have their damage is pretty damn good. They're very, very, like, they have a lot of HP. They can do a lot of different damage. Their icicle fucking hurts. If you've ever gotten dinged from an icicle from like across a map, you know how painful it is. Their freeze is pretty damn good. They can stat check a lot of people at close or even further ranges. They just don't have the mobility, but because they have the utility to deny others from taking space around them, it'll be a really, really good kind of generalist hero, but you aren't able to necessarily fly around the map like some of the other ones. But it's still going to be leaning a little bit more towards like the center, because they're so balanced between their utility and their raw numbers. They're able to play in a very wide variety of different comps. But Mei would struggle on maps that mobility is just really dominant, something like Watchpoint Gibraltar with insane high grounds, because if you need the mobility to really get up there and use your raw numbers or use your utility, but the map just kind of dictates where you're not, it's going to be hard to get to those positions, then Mei will struggle. Those are the areas that Mei would struggle, because they don't have the mobility to get into a place to use the other sources of their value. All right, I'm taking a little bit of a break to read chat for a second. Hey, if you want to climb to Diamond in support using Brig, Mizuki, and Wuyang, do you think that covers most of the needed scenarios and has carry potential? Brig, Mizuki, Wuyang. Yeah. To Diamond? Yeah, you can definitely do that. Yeah, absolutely, you can be doing that. What I'd recommend is probably play a good bit of Axta, and make sure that you're able to hit your whip shots consistently. You're able to hit your Mizuki chains and M1s consistently, as well as your Wuyang orbs. Your Wuyang orbs are going to be especially a very powerful weapon that you need to get really, really good if you want to be climbing up to Diamond. So humble. I don't know if humble is necessarily a trait or a word that necessarily suits me. I don't like putting other people down, but I also don't like putting myself down. To be fair, coverage is not actually where you recommend, right? I don't know what you mean. They did give her some vertical mobility with the glacial propulsion perk. Oh yes, that's true. Mei has a little bit of that mobility now, and that's a really good change, because that was her weakness as a character. It adds, but it doesn't necessarily like change that much. What I think perks should do is it should never take away like aspects of your kit, but it should add like new ways or cover some of your weaknesses. So like I like Kiriko's a lot because it specs you can either give yourself a little bit more utility, or you can give yourself raw numbers, but you're not necessarily taking away from anything else. But I really dislike Orisa's major perks because you straight up take away your utility to spec more into the raw numbers corner of the triangle. That's not right. That's more right. Mauga's stupid. Mauga's so stupid. They just need to make... I think Mauga would be so cool. Well, cool in quotations, if they just made Pin like a longer cooldown. Pin being a 4-second or 5-second cooldown is just insane. Because now you can kind of get to anywhere that you want on the map. Alright, brief tangent about Mauga. Yeah, Overrun is insane. Mauga is the biggest brawler in the game. Theoretically, they should be all the way over here. They should be in the raw, like mega raw numbers category because they just they have the most HP. They're able to lifesteal. They can just kind of stat check anyone that they want in the game. In a raw 1v1, no one can beat Mauga necessarily without insane utility. But what makes this so insane is Overrun is disgusting. It gives Mauga a lot of mobility value sources where they're able to straight up fight and force people to fight the Mauga or dump in a bunch of CDs and utility into the Mauga, and then they're able to just run away because it's on an insanely short cooldown. And the biggest, most horrific offender is that you're unstoppable during it. That trait of Overrun is what makes Mauga either so insanely busted or so insanely weak. Because what raw number, like if you're going to spec into raw numbers and mobility, that is a-okay. Because then more utility-based heroes are going to be able to deny it. So let's say if Mauga did not have Unstoppable on their Overrun, Sombra would be able to like hack Mauga out of the pin, or Mizuki would be able to chain something, May freeze, whatever. There'd be a lot of utility to stop Mauga's mobility, and they'd be forced to play a little bit more towards a raw numbers value, which is already one of, if not the most dominant raw number value sources in the game. But because Mauga's pin denies a lot of the utility that could potentially stop their insane strengths, they're going to be so dominant in a lot of different places. The only times that you're going to see Mauga like not crazy viable is if their mobility is just completely and utterly outclassed or outmatched, to the point where like they are not able to keep up even with their 5-second cooldown. But that's going to be fine because that's just kind of how balance works. Look at Domina. As soon as Domina gets surrounded, even though their raw numbers aren't even that bad, and it's actually pretty good, they kind of suck right now because they're just able to consistently be surrounded over and over and over again. They just straight up don't have the mobility to do anything. And it really, really sucks. Same with Sigma, but Sigma has a few utility-based tools to actually deal with the mobility around them. But Mauga, even though they have the ability to stat check anyone that they want in the game, they also have a lot of options to deny the things that could stop them from stat checking everyone in the game. I think that Mauga could be taken a look at for a rework, but mainly just the Overrun. Overrun is the biggest offender. I think Cardiac Overdrive is chill. I think that the raw like damage that they do, the fire is a fun ability. I think that it's all pretty chill, but it's just the Unstoppable. There's not much counterplay to a Mauga because they just can't be stopped. You can't stop them because that's how it was designed. It really sucks. Okay. I think that Mauga Overrun can just cancel out of Ryan pins is so I agree. Okay, no, that's the biggest thing about why Reinhardt sucks is because Reinhardt has no significant tools to counteract anyone who has more mobility than the Reinhardt or has utility to stop Reinhardt from going where they want to go. If you ever played Reinhardt into a Mei, you know it fucking sucks. If you want to be backing up and you just get walled in, fuck that. You can't play the game. Or if you get walled off and you can't step forward or you can't leap over the wall or anything, it would just suck. Or if you play into Orisa, even though you have a little bit more effective HP and you do a little bit more damage at close range than Orisa just has an insane amount of utility to deny your steps as Reinhardt. So you're not able to play for your raw numbers exchange whatsoever, and your mobility sucks comparative to a lot of the casts, and your utility sucks comparative to a lot of the casts. Reinhardt is just weak because of those aspects, or not having any sort of counterplay to the other value sources in the game. But that leads me to a different hero, someone who is able to help out Reinhardt a lot by covering for some of their weaknesses, is Lucio. Where Lucio is going to be speccing and getting a lot of their value through the utility and the mobility. The utility to enable heroes like Reinhardt to actually get to places where they need to be by providing more mobility for more raw numbers based heroes. That's why Jetpack Cat is so insane right now, is because they can provide Jetpack Cat levels of mobility to a Bastion or something, or anyone that they really want. But Lucio can do a similar thing, but for an entire team, as well as deny and use their own mobility to contest some of the flankers and the angles that would be taken around Reinhardt. They're able to use their mobility to actually like fight a bit more with Reinhardt. So this list does kind of change a little bit, where previously back in like Overwatch 1 or something, Lucio would get most of their utility or most of their value through utility. Nowadays, Lucio is going to get most of their value through mobility, because there's one less person to speed around, as well as there's more mobile heroes who don't need that much utility. So this list is always in flux and it's always subjective. So if like your list or where you place people could be different from mine, and that is a-okay. That is very, very a-okay. I don't know why Ball is up there towards utility. Ball is way more mobility based than utility. But in 6v6 they're more utility based. It's always in flux. It's always in flux. But they can be playing generally for utility or mobility. Mainly mobility though. But that leads me to my next hero. Who else do we have? Genji. Genji's actually a really interesting one, where they are going to be leaning more into the mobility and the raw numbers, because they have the wall climb, they have their dash, they have a lot of and they just naturally run faster than all of the other cast members. They are straight up going to be able to play for their mobility, but they're going to have a lot more raw numbers comparative to a hero like Tracer. Tracer is actually going to struggle a little bit at like frontlining as much like a Genji would, because Genji has a bit more HP. Genji does a bit more damage at like closer range or in like huge bursts, kind of like because their right click is like that huge shotgun spread. But Tracer has a lot more mobility to take space more on the map and find better angles to get their value or do damage from their raw numbers. So Tracer is going to be speccing into this mobility portion, but Genji is going to be speccing a good bit more into the raw numbers. Genji still does have a little bit of utility coming from the form of Deflect. Deflect can be a useful utility like CD based off of what it's playing into. You'll see in previous Mauga metas, actually, instead of Echo, some teams would be playing Genji with the idea of it would act similar to a DM, where if there was a Mauga shooting at you or something, you could immediately hit Deflect, which would completely negate Mauga's lifesteal and take it basically for yourself. You would deny a lot of the damage, and there would be no real like consequence to doing so, because it's just how good your utility is. But it's very rare for metas like that to be the case or be prevalent in the game, so Genji is going to not find that much utility out of their Deflect, and it's going to be more a bit for their own survivability, but it's still pretty damn good. Especially in like instances where you recognize that you can deny other people's plays with your Deflect. What up, Untruths? And Clean, thank you for the follow, Clean and SoCan. I appreciate it. Okay, but leading into the next hero, Reaper. Oh, thank you for the follow, Jimmy John the Fourth. Goated name. Reaper. Reaper is also going to be one of the heroes that is fairly prevalent in a lot of different metas that you'll see used in pro play because they can pull from a lot of different value sources. They're going to have a lot more raw numbers than Genji. They're going to have a little bit less mobility than the Genji Tracer though. But I guess there's no utility that Reaper provides. So it's just going to be a perfect balance between this mobility and the raw numbers, leaning a little bit more towards the raw numbers as they only have two forms of mobility, being their teleport and the increased speed that they get during Wraith. But they're going to have a lot more options on how to use their raw numbers based off of the recent buffs with their dire triggers being on their base kit, so they can be at various different ranges and they need to use less of their mobility options to actually deal significant amounts of damage to the enemy team, because the dire triggers will allow them to fight and have better numbers at longer range. So they need less mobility to necessarily get their value. Reaper, because they are kind of like really balanced between these two areas and their numbers are fairly strong, they're going to be quite good at playing around different metas, and they're going to be able to be slotted into a lot of different comps. And I think that's not all of the heroes that I have. I think I have one more downloaded already, and then we're going to be slowing things down a bit, unfortunately, as I need to download some of the hero icons. I wonder if I could just copy it. Wait, Loki? Hold on, does this work? Bang, it works. Okay, we're in business. We're in business, baby. All right, we'll get to that soon. Last one I have on my computer right now is Zenyatta, Zenyatta is going to be the hero that leans by far the most into raw numbers. And it's not close at all, because every other support is going to have some form of like utility or mobility or anything. Not Zenyatta. Zenyatta's only utility comes in the form of their snap kick to push people away. It's a minor boop, but they would need to be inside of the Zenyatta's face to do so. That is the only form of utility that Zenyatta has, and I guess there's the float perk that gives them mobility, and that's why it's so strong, is giving any sort of crazy raw numbers hero a form of mobility or utility is generally going to be really strong, because you have more options in how you can be using your raw numbers. But even their Harmony, it literally only heals. Discord, it's literally just whoever you have Discord on effectively loses 30% of their effective HP. It's just damage. You literally just straight up damage someone for 30% of their HP as soon as you put it on. While it is technically like a utility, the utility is that you do more damage. So it's a lot more about like kind of like raw numbers. So Zenyatta's base kit without the perks are going to be probably, is it the most raw numbers based hero in the game? I think it is. Yeah, even more so than Bastion. More so than Mauga, more so than Reinhardt. Yeah, Zenyatta is just the most raw numbers based hero in the game, where if you are able to just pump in a bunch of damage, then you'll be really strong on Zenyatta. But that's also why Zenyatta's been weak recently, because they don't have the tools necessary to keep up with everybody having a fucking dash. They're not able to follow up on it to secure any kills based off the damage that they can do, because they don't have mobility to follow or chase people down, as well as they don't have any mobility or utility themselves to stay alive. Since they're able to just get instantly surrounded and then blown up at like a moment's notice, they're going to be quite weak, because it's way harder to play for your raw damage. It's just harder to get your damage in, straight up. You don't have tools to help you with it whatsoever. So do Wuyang next? Yeah. Wuyang can be played in a few different ways. They're going to be kind of like a lighter generalist hero, but they are leaning definitely towards the raw numbers side of things, where everything, remember, everything on this list is comparable or comparative, where Wuyang doesn't do as much damage as Zenyatta. They're still going to do a lot more damage than like a Lucio would over time. So they're going to be leaning a lot more towards this raw numbers. They're not going to be able to move around nearly as much as like a Lucio or a Jetpack Cat would, but they also have a little bit of utility, like they have a little bit of utility in the form of their wave, which is going to allow them to boot people back and somewhat deny some enemy plays, as well as enable your own team's plays through more healing. Or increasing your, like, maybe other supports healing. That's going to be leaning a little bit more towards the numbers as well. And it's why you'll see a lot of Wuyangs being played in areas where you can just kind of pump in damage over time. It's going to be a little bit more so longer range maps, while you can still force them into a lot of different scenarios because you actually have tools to get your numbers active and, like, into the fight, unlike a Zenyatta could in a lot of instances. It'll still mainly be played in areas like Circuit Royale or like Runasapi, very like sort of closer range or like one lane maps that'll allow you to just do more damage straight up, or there are less options for mobility or utility based heroes to actually get value from those sources, and it'll just kind of be like a big damage fest. That's why Circuit Royale is so based around like Sigma. And that leads me to our next one. Another hero that plays very similarly to Wuyang is going to be Illari. You'll see a lot of these heroes kind of placed interchangeably around heroes, but I think that Illari is going to have a little bit more utility in the form of their pylon being able to control a bit more space. But they are also speccing quite a bit towards the raw numbers, just like a Wuyang would. They're going to be very, very similar. The only differences between these heroes is going to be kind of how they do their damage. So Illari is going to be a little bit better on open-based maps because her gun is hit scan and her damage is hit scan, which is going to be easier to hit and easier to farm those raw numbers in open space comparative to Wuyang, because there's going to be more places for somebody to be able to like dodge a Wuyang orb, and it's going to take longer for a Wuyang orb to connect and generally do less damage over time. But Illari, just as a hit scan, it doesn't matter how far away they are, the shot's still going to hit, and it's not going to take nearly as much time as like a Wuyang orb would. So they're going to play similarly, but the micro is very different on these heroes, which is going to enable them in some specific areas and not so much in other ones. So it's going to be very, very, very similarly based heroes. So I think Pylon enables utility slightly more than like a Wuyang Wave would, because Pylon allows more map control. If you're able to place it somewhere and then hold a different location as Illari, it's really, really, really strong. Alright. Illari has less utility than Wuyang, potentially. Yeah, that could definitely be the case. Wuyang's boop with their wave is definitely super, super strong. And again, like this list is completely subjective. Generally, they're going to be playing for similar things, I think. But some people like saying that Wuyang has a bit more utility than Illari, or Illari has a bit more like mobility and Wuyang, whatever the argument is. All of this is subjective, and every hero derives value from each of the corners at some point, or can in some way. This is just my general take on how I'd place the heroes and what I'd sort of be leaning towards. Kiriko, Zenyatta, Moira, Lifeweaver are good supports to lean on. Yeah, I agree. I asked earlier, but if I'm learning on support, who should I play? Kiri? Kiri's really good. Yeah, if you can learn Kiriko, do that. You one-trick Ryan whenever you play tank. It's like playing Jason on Voorhees. Then Healing Orb has really easy time supporting Flex CPS, so that has good utility. I agree. I definitely agree. Yeah, that's a good point. Bang. It's just like a pylon. Zenyatta gets a little bit of utility. Makes a lot of sense. Actually, Lifeweaver has a lot of utility, but his numbers are lackluster. It's a great way to understand the game. Yes, Lifeweaver. I think that's a really good one. Then we'll do Junkrat next. Lifeweaver is a very utility-based hero. That's going to be what their kind of like whole gimmick is. Where they've been... When Lifeweaver released, they actually didn't have the raw numbers to necessarily keep up with the game, and since utility is weaker in 5v5 They have more utility than Mizuki. Since Lifeweaver didn't have the raw numbers to keep up with the game, it was going to be like really, really hard to actually do things. Even if they save somebody, it was going to be hard to actually heal, because they didn't even have anything that they really necessarily could heal. 4, 5. I'm just trying to make sure we're good on time. Yeah, okay. But Lifeweaver with their pull and their life pedal can actually be fairly strong in 6v6, or at least that's my theory, because utility is generally going to be more valuable in 6v6 and enable more people to make plays or deny more people from making their own plays. In 5v5, Lifeweaver can be a little bit weaker because it's harder to get more value out of that utility, since there's less kind of going on the map. Actually, Lifeweaver, I've been fairly good about meta predictions and which new heroes are going to be good or won't be good once I understand them. Lifeweaver was actually the hero that came out most recently that I actually had a pretty strong opinion on their place in the meta that I was really wrong about. I was actually really, really wrong about my initial theory of how good Lifeweaver would be, because I was still very much so in the headset of 6v6, where my thought process was back in 6v6, the most dominant meta towards the end, and like the dead zone of like Overwatch not being updated for like a year or so, was the meta that was dominant was WreckingBall Diva, Tracer, Ashe/Echo, Brigitte, and Zenyatta. What I figured was that Zenyatta's raw numbers were always really insanely strong. Zenyatta's raw numbers are insane. Fundamentally, Discord Orb is a very strong ability, but it's very hard to use based off of everybody being able to just kind of kill Zenyatta and then being a very glass cannon based hero. But my theory was that Lifeweaver would actually provide a lot more space, or like provide an escape route for Zenyatta to be getting active and using their Discord Orb more freely. And you would play a lot of low resource or low healing demanding heroes like Ball, Tracer again, and it would lean back towards that sort of meta style. But my mistake in understanding of the game at that time was that there was a lot more mobility and there was one less hero to buffer and control space for your team. So after the Zenyatta get dived, there would be more mobility in the game in Overwatch 2 compared to Overwatch 1 that would allow them to chase down the Zenyatta and the Lifeweaver after the Zen got pulled out, or they just literally wouldn't have the space necessary to like stop the enemy team or have safe spaces on the map to like stabilize later. It was just much, much harder to execute because there's more mobility in the game, and utility is fundamentally weaker in 5v5 compared to 6v6. But Lifeweaver slowly got buffed to get more raw numbers, and they are having a decent place nowadays, and they're very viable up to champ. There's still quite a few good like Lifeweaver one tricks and like champ. And then Junkrat. I said I'd do Junkrat next. Junkrat is a very interesting hero, and this might be the hero that I'm most wrong about since I haven't studied them in a very, very long time. But they are going to be somewhat more generalist based, actually. I think the value sources that Junkrat can play for currently is going to be leaning towards the sort of like raw number and mobility, where they do a shit ton of damage. Junkrat does so much fucking damage, bro. Though they also have their concussion mines to get to decent places to allow them to use their damage. The utility of the trap and displacement of the mines as well is also something to consider, though I think that it's harder to derive value from those sources or utility nowadays, because there's a lot of things that can either just kind of like walk through a steel trap, you'll be able to like shoot it consistently, or there's a lot of like immortality abilities that will just kind of negate the steel trap's value. So I think that currently it kind of lean kind of nearby Mauga. I think actually it's kind of like this. Yeah. Yeah, but Junkrat's going to struggle for a while here because it's hard for them to actually do a lot of damage based off of the form of their damage being the very slow and hard to hit projectile, which mobility based heroes are going to be insanely difficult to actually like deal damage to, because if a fucking wrecking ball is flying in the air Mach 10, like there's very few Junkrat players in the world who have the mechanical ability to get value out of their raw numbers damage source. Even though theoretically it is still there. So a lot of like less mechanically inclined Junkrat players are going to be trying to play a little bit more towards peeling like attention away from different spaces on the map, utilizing their mobility of their concussion mines. And next hero. God, there's so many fucking heroes in this game now, bro. There's so many. Let's do another generalist. Torbjorn. Bang. So Torbjorn, I think, is actually going to be somewhat more in the sort of center of the triangle, leaning a bit more towards utility and raw numbers. So Torbjorn has a good amount of just raw damage that they deal, as well as sustainability and HP comparative to like Tracer, Genji, other big flanker heroes. But also has the utility of the turret to control more space on the map and deny other heroes from necessarily taking space easily, which will also help them with their raw numbers. You can put your turret on the front line, but it's more useful as a bit more of like a space controlling utility to deny other people on the enemy team from going from easy flanks. Torbjorn still has a little bit of mobility based in the their increased speed of their overload, but it's not going to be that prevalent because it is, while it's still like plus 30% move speed, and then the hammer time minor perk will allow them to walk 20% faster, they're not able to do damage while they're holding their hammer out, as well as it's also committing your sustainability and your raw numbers based CD for more movement whenever you pop your overload, which is kind of it can be a little bit hard to execute sometimes, but Torbjorn is going to be possible to play in a lot of different comps and a lot of different areas because it's really good, or they can do a lot of different things, but they'll struggle to keep up in more like very mobile dive-based comps because they just don't have that sort of like value, or they don't have that kind of ability. But heroes that might, and other generalist heroes like Symmetra, are going to be really fucking strong in a lot of different ways. Symmetra is also going to be one of the main hyper generalist heroes of the game, where they're going to be excelling in a lot of different areas. You're going to have mobility, you're going to have raw numbers, she does a shit ton of damage, she is able to use her teleporter to get to a lot of different places, or the teleporter as a utility to put other people on their team into different places. But you'll see, especially nowadays for solo queue Symmetras or high rank Symmetra players, most of the time you're not actually using your teleporter as a utility, you're using it more so for your own mobility. You're using it to control more space on the map for you. But you also have the utility of your turrets for information, as well as denying sort of flanks from the enemy team, which can be really, really, really strong to shut down more mobility based playstyles. Because you're able to see where they're coming from, you're able to see exactly like where and what space on the map they're controlling, and then later you can also slow them down with your turrets too. Actually, not just later, it's just base kit, right? Yeah. So Symmetra is going to be another hyper generalist kind of hero, or who can be played in a very, very wide variety of different places. Okay, I'm taking a sip of water while I read chat for a moment. Feel like Sim is the best utility in the game? That's definitely, I think, a fair argument. I think that Symmetra's teleporter and turrets can just shut down or enable their teams, shut down the enemy team or enable her team so much. It is very, very, very strong utility. I just think that sometimes, in most areas or most times, you're going to be finding even more value through your raw numbers or your mobility. It's kind of insane how much Symmetra just can do. Ban Sim on every single control map because I don't care about her pick rate. She makes that shit borderline unplayable if they get control of the point. That's true. Now, retaking into turrets can be like mega hell. Raises a question for you. Is there proactive and reactive utility? Lifeweaver provides more utility than Mizuki and has a lot of raw numbers closer to him, but Mizuki still has a lot of playmaking. Yeah, I think that's definitely a category or thought that you could be applying to this, of more proactive and reactive utility. Lifeweaver's utility is definitely more so reactive, but Lifeweaver can be using theirs in a lot more of a proactive, reactive way. I think you can be using both, or kind of all forms of utility in proactive or reactive ways. There's going to be more common like utility-based CDs are going to be like leaning towards one of the two, but I think that's definitely a category that you could put or like sort of lean into if it fits well in your brain. Like you can still be going for aggressive whip shots and displacing people or booping people into your team, but you also are mainly going to be using whip shots to like deny others, which leads me to what you have Brig on here. We do not. Wonderful. Brigitte is also going to be one of the heroes that plays for a lot of utility. I don't like that picture of Brig. I want to get a different one. But Brigitte is going to be a hero that really makes it possible to shut down a lot of the enemy team's plays, as well as packing your own team to enable them to take a lot of different space. It's going to be very, very, very strong. It's going to be super strong in terms of like the utility value that Brigitte can provide. Having a little bit less, I wouldn't say less mobility than Mizuki, but it's comparable. Brigitte is going to be able to heal a good amount as well, though. That looks good. Yeah, that looks good. Brigitte is able to heal quite a bit in closer or more clumped groups based off of the Inspire that she's able to proc, being able to put in a bunch of healing over time. But most of Brigitte's value is going to come from her utility of denying the enemy team's plays with her whip shot or shield bash, as well as packing her teammates who want to be taking a bit more like angles or aggressive space because it's super range-based healing. It's really, 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 really strong. But a hero like Juno, I think, is going to be fairly centralized, but maybe leaning a little bit less towards the mobility aspect and a bit more towards the raw numbers comparative to like Kiriko would. It's kind of like here-ish, actually. Yeah. Where Juno is going to provide the utility of the speed boost ring, or the speed ring, to her teammates, which will allow them to kind of walk or maneuver to places easier. Speed is going to be one of the strongest utilities in the game, historically at least. Maybe it could be shifting nowadays because everyone has their own mobility. But Hyper Ring is going to allow people to get to places quicker and use their raw numbers a little bit easier. But she also is able to just heal a shit ton. 72 healing per volley, which is it's really damn good, actually. As well as has not that much fall off. She doesn't have crazy amounts of mobility. While she does have a good amount, it's not going to be anything like a Kiriko TP or Lucio wall ride. She's going to be able to sustain herself a lot more in kind of like smaller ways. She's going to be able to dodge shots easy and potentially get over some roofs, but she's going to not be able to find real value out of her mobility by controlling like a shit ton of like angles and space on the map herself. It's going to be more so as a survivability tool for her to be able to put in more numbers or stay alive to get her speed rings off. But Juno is really, really still strong in both the numbers and the utility, but more so for the numbers. You're going to be wanting to play Juno if you want to heal a lot. But that leads me to our next heroes. God, there's so many heroes. Let's get some tanks going. We haven't talked about tanks in a while. Actually, let's end on Reinhardt. We are... Wow, time is flying. Ramatra fucking does it all, and it sucks, and I hate Ramatra. Another generalist hero, and it's why they're so prevalent in a lot of metas, or what I would consider more generalist-based heroes, and why they're so prevalent in metas. Ramatra is able to run people down or run comparative to a lot of other tanks with their speed boosts that they get during their form. They have really good raw numbers based off of their damage and their punch, and they're able to straight up negate damage with their damage reduction during their block. Minus 75% of damage taken will be a huge like ability that will help them deal with more raw numbers based heroes. So if you're ever able to put your back to the wall, start just giving yourself a big old hug, you're going to take like 0 damage. But they also have a lot of utility in the form of like either shield to cut off healing. You can be using shield as a utility bait, like to cut off a lot of the healing that the enemy team would want to be making and cutting off, like splitting the enemy team. Or you can be using your Ravenous Vortex to shut down a lot of mobility-based cooldowns or plays that the enemy would want to make. It's a really strong hero in terms of you can just be kind of doing a lot of different things. And it's why Ram is going to be so prevalent in the meta, and why I keep referring back to the concept of as soon as one of the hyper generalist numbers are good, once they're able to find consistent value and like not be super duper outclassed by anyone in specific, as soon as that's the case, like the hyper generalist heroes just take over like really hard. But Ramatra is actually not that strong right now because Mauga and Bastion are so incredibly prevalent, who are going to be somewhat of heroes. Well, mainly Bastion because they have Jetpack Cat. Bastion and Jetpack Cat are going to be really good into Ramatra because they can take angles easily. And Mauga has the small amount of utility that Mauga has with their pin and their slam. Being able to stun Ramatra out of their block will actually allow Mauga to win the trade against Ramatra with their raw numbers. Because as soon as you take away Ramatra's block in their nemesis form, they're going to be losing that 1v1 to the Mauga consistently. Mauga still wins over time usually, because you can't shoot back when you're on when you're playing Ramatra and you're blocking, but other people are in the game as well. So that's why Ramatra isn't insanely absurdly prevalent right now, but especially with the vortex, the slow vortex being added to Ramatra's base kit, that makes the utility much more consistent to hit, and it makes Ramatra really strong. But there are just their counters, or the things that stop them from getting the value that they really want to be leaning into, are just fairly prevalent right now. And I would suspect, and I would guess, that as soon as if Mauga gets nerfed at all, or if Bastion gets kind of taken out of the game, we'll be in a Ram world. We'll be in a pretty big Ram world, because they are in a really good spot numbers wise right now. There's just that one, or the few utility in the game that's really prevalent is what shuts down Ramatra's ability to get their value. The Freddish Fazbear. Doesn't Juno have strong mobility with the double jump, glide, and triple jump with her perk? Yeah, she does have a lot of, like, I think that's a lot of kind of individual survivability in terms of her mobility, but it's not going to be raw, like, sort of top-down or macro value based mobility like a Tracer or Ball or Genji, Lucio. All the other heroes that are going to be playing for value out of their mobility is going to be like that's where their value comes from, is the mobility. But Juno's mobility are just tools to allow them to get their raw numbers kind of like off more consistently. But most of the time you'll see a lot of high ranked Juno players, if they're not being pressured, they won't be picking like They won't be picking the triple jump perk. They won't be like, the only thing that they'll be doing is just like sitting at the back of the map on the ground, just healing people, because their raw numbers is where they're deriving most of their value from. Since if you try to take an angle on Juno, every other mobility based hero is just going to slime you out for the most part, or they should slime you out, because Juno doesn't have the actual like 1v1 potential that a lot of other mobility based heroes do, or the self-sustain that a lot of other mobility based heroes do. There's a lot of ranked. This is where a lot of ranked experience differs in scrims. Now, up until now, I always learned that proactivity will rank you up because you depend less on your team, but this isn't the case for scrims. Yeah, for the most part, I do want to make a video at some point talking about the differences between scrims and competitive play and ranked, because there are a lot less differences than people imagine. I'm telling you right now, for 99.999% of the player base, if you make up a team of 5 Masters players and you make up a team of like 5 GM players, it's very, very, very much in favor of the GM players winning. I think that the intricacies of team play are only super valuable to focus on once you get to fairly high levels in team play. I'm talking like around Faceit like advanced or Faceit expert. Faceit level advanced or Faceit level expert is when you'd want to be starting to put more thought and time into the intricacies of team play. But before that, I've been coaching for a very long time. I've been coaching for about like 6 or 7 years now. And I've coached like one of my most proudest achievements in this game is I coached a gold team, and almost every player on that team eventually got up to either like high masters or GM from gold. And the team itself started with like 2K or like gold scrims, and then ended up scrimming consistently in like mid to high grandmaster. I've done a bunch of other coaching. I've coached up to like semi-professional level teams briefly. I've coached like a lot of tier 3 or like what would be now like Faceit expert. I've coached a lot of like Faceit expert level teams. And I will be so for real. Everything is individual based until like the upper echelons of like team play. I'll be so for real. If any of you are trying to get into like competing, grind ranked. Because if you're a good ranked player, you will be good in scrims. I promise. I pinky swear. It does not change much. If you know how to find your value, that is the fundamental thing that you need in Overwatch. If you're trying to go pro, if you're trying to climb rank, if you're trying to do good in scrims, have fun with your team in tournaments, whatever, know how to find your specific value. That is the number one most important thing. And a lot of people end up focusing too early on like team play and combinations and like set plays, whatever. And it ends up detracting from a lot of how do I just find my value? And it stagnates them like a huge amounts. So if you're trying to get into like competitive play, grind ranked, focus on what you can do. Around like expert, Faceit expert, or like maybe high advance, I'm not sure, is when you'd want to really start thinking about team play stuff, or like the intricacies of team play stuff. All right, but little tangent out of the way. Yeah, I'll make a video of that, since the nuances between team play and ranked are really cool. I need to ask how much time I have. I don't know if my team is VODing or not. If they aren't, then we have quite a bit of time. But anyways, back to putting things on the triangle. Where would I put Widowmaker? Let's see. Widowmaker is a very interesting hero. And I'm going to be this is probably going to be my hottest take in the game. Or hottest take on this list that a lot of people might not agree with. I think Widowmaker goes here. I think Widowmaker is a very utility-based hero, and the utility isn't necessarily an exact CD or a anti-nade or a Suzu or whatever. The utility that Widowmaker provides is the threat of a one-shot, where if you're playing against a good Widowmaker, you can't fucking peek it. You are so limited by what you can actually do. The ultimate utility, yeah, there's an argument. I would not necessarily disagree with Widowmaker going at the top of utility. While they can do like numbers and they have the grapple hook to actually get into decent spots, Widowmaker's utility is just the fact that it makes it so hard for everybody on the enemy team to play the game if she isn't dealt with. But you need to hit the shots consistently to do so. So I would say Widowmaker specs a lot into the utility, though it's unlike every other utility in the game, because instead of just hitting a cooldown or denying plays directly through like your own kit, you're denying plays by your presence. You're denying plays from your just raw threat of being on the map. And it makes it fundamentally changes how everyone else needs to play the game. It's insane. Maybe today is a special day. I've hit Masters 5 after grinding for 3 weeks. I think you've had a lot of that progress is thanks to you. Thank you so much. You're a gem of the community. Awesome. Congrats, bro. Let's go. Masters 5. I'm super happy about your grind. I'm glad I was able to help. That's so awesome. Congrats. Feel proud. Masters 5 is really, really good. It's insane. And I don't mean that sarcastically, like, I don't know, like, genuinely, like, Masters is, like, super awesome. I'm proud of you. But locking back into this a little bit here, let's talk about Hazard. I like Hazard. We haven't gone through a lot of the tanks yet. Hazard is going to be also a fairly sort of generalized or generalist hero, and that's why they're going to be kind of like popping up randomly in various different metas. They're going to be very similar to D.Va, except specking a bit more towards the raw numbers and a little bit less towards the utility and the mobility of D.Va, but they're going to do very similar things. They don't have as many raw numbers as Ram, so I don't want to put them lower like that. They're like right there. D.Va's going to spec just a little bit more into utility because their defense matrix is going to be able to deny a few more things consistently than like a wall would. And Hazard is going to spec a little bit more into raw numbers because they just do more damage. Their block, the damage reduction is fucking insane, fundamentally. And they just hurt. They can just one-shot similar to a D.Va, and they still have their mobility. Hazard's going to be one of those heroes where if their numbers are a little bit overtuned, they're going to be really, really, really dominant. But if they're a little bit undertuned, they're not going to be so crazy. So that's why you saw Hazard being super, super prevalent in ranked and in some like Face It Expert or Face It Masters level teams, because it would... Like the initiator perk allowing you to gain 60 HP per every time you basically hopped on a wall would be really, really beneficial for Hazard, especially with being the only tank with the wall climb ability. Well, I guess WreckingBall, but whatever. So Hazard will effectively gain a bunch of HP and be spec'd a little bit more towards the raw numbers, or find easier time deriving value from the raw numbers because of that extra healing that they would get from the initiator sub role. But that leads me into Doomfist, who is going to be quite mobility and quite utility based. Doomfist is going to have a very hard time raw stat checking basically any other tank in the game, similarly to Ball. With Doomfist and Ball, you'll see a lot of Doom players learning Ball, and you'll see a lot of Ball players learning Doomfist very, very quickly because they are super, super similar in where they actually derive value from. But the biggest thing is that the micro and how, like, the actual execution of how you're getting those value sources is much more different. But Doomfist is going to be a little bit more based in utility and a little bit less so for mobility, because you actually have hard CC with your punch, you have slows with your slam. You're going to be able to do quite a bit in terms of like CC, and then also absorbing mode power block, which is kind of insane. Doomfist will be leaning a little bit more towards utility and slightly more towards the raw numbers than like a WreckingBall would, but they are going to be playing very similarly. In terms of how like they actually want to be playing. St. Texas, Widow more utility than May? Widow utility only good if her numbers are good, May utility good even if numbers are bad? Maybe. I mean, it's just the argument for Widowmaker is the threat of the one shot is just insane. That is Widowmaker's utility. Which actually leads me to... Where are they at? There they are. Bang. Now Roadhog is going to be kind of a combination between the utility and the raw numbers, kind of right in the middle actually. The hook, chain hook is your only utility, but it's a pretty damn good one. Being a similar threat to a Widowmaker one shot is going to be kind of insane because now the entire team has to respect you every time you have this cooldown unlocked, unless they have some sort of utility to prevent it in the first place. But your utility of the chain hook will be very, very good to deny a lot of mobility based value sources, as well as you have the raw damage to just stat check people at closer ranges compared to a lot of other sort of dive based tanks. You don't want to get into a Roadhog's face as Winston or Ball or Diva necessarily unless they're already low. So Roadhog is going to be finding a lot of utility through their hook and their presence on the field, as well as they're going to be able to raw stat check a lot of tanks, not like Ramatra or Orisa, but maybe something like a Hazard. No, yeah, it's like this. Yeah, it's like that. Roadhog is going to be able to just find a lot of their value through utility and raw numbers, and that's why once they had their speed boost perk that would give them a little bit more mobility, they were actually very scary in ranked for a while because it'd be way easier to find the value out of their utility and the raw numbers. But next hero. Alright, let me talk about this girl for a bit. Because I've played Anran a lot since I first played them in the Ranks Lesson series. I thought that their kit was really fun. I thought Anran was awesome. I thought that Anran was really, really fun. It was super, super cool to play Anran. However, I think they suck dick. I think Anran is in a really weak spot right now. So Anran struggles in everything. Literally everything. It's a very good example of a generalist hero who can't do shit. I actually don't think that they have that much utility. It's mainly just mobility and raw numbers. A little bit more utility than Genji with their boops on their dashes, as well as fire is kind of scary. But what Anran does is they can kind of do everything. They can get to a lot of places with their mobility really quickly. They should have decent raw numbers. They can have somewhat decent utility, but even despite them being able to pull from some a good amount of these value sources, it's actually this is what happens when somebody's numbers aren't actually good enough to pull from every value source consistently, because anytime you can't win a frontline trade against a Reaper. You can't win, you can't pressure the tank as well as a Reaper can, or a Bastion could, or any sort of hero that wants to be spec'ing towards raw numbers. You can't be taking the off angles and sort of controlling lanes like a Tracer or a Genji could, because you just don't have as much sort of raw mobility and self-sustain as the Tracer would, as well as you just don't have the utility that anyone else would really provide. But utility is fairly weak right now, but you just can't do shit. You just get outclassed in both of the categories to the point where you don't have a niche as Anran. You just straight up don't. The only niche that you really have as Anran is if the enemy team is playing Genji or Diva. These are the two heroes that you actually want to be picking Anran into consistently, and would be like the optimal pick into, because your utility of being able to shoot through, deflect, and DM with your fan is going to allow you a good matchup into these two specific heroes. Aside from that, you get outclassed in literally everything else. So actually, I suppose right now, Anran's value would be leaning a little bit more towards their utility, because goddamn, is it not raw numbers? It is not raw numbers whatsoever. Slowly picking up Anran. Yeah, she's really fun. Yeah, so much fun. She's so fun. It's insane how much fun Anran's kit is. Onion is super cool. They just suck. I will continue to play Anran. I will continue to play Onion until the layers are all peeled back. But every time I'm playing Onion, it just rings in my head. I could be doing so much more on Genji or Tracer right now. I could be doing so much more. But yeah, Onion's a really fun hero. Subroll passive change now only work on specific cooldown down to 50 HP. Yeah, that nerf definitely hurt Hazard a lot. It hurt fucking everyone. It's insane how, like, Winston got hurt really bad from it, and Winston already sucked. Like, they're just slowly killing my boy. I know they don't mean to, but that, oh my god, it hurts so much. But Winston's just like losing their niche more and more. It's like Anran, where most of the time when I'm playing Anran, I'm thinking I could be doing so much more on Genji and Tracer. I am a Winston player. Let me see if I can find my account. I cannot. Do I have Rolling Girl at it? No, I don't. Let me see if it's on this account even. Yeah, like this account, still fairly new, but I'm still playing Winston primarily. And I have definitely over like 1,000 hours on Winston. And I'm the first one to advocate for if a hero that I like is viable, but just really hard, because I like playing the hard things. A lot of the times hyper generalists are going to be hard heroes to find value out of, because you need a lot of game knowledge and execution of the heroes to derive value consistently. But with Winston, despite you needing a lot of knowledge and execution, the level of execution has just gotten so difficult because you're outclassed in everything, to the point where it's just too hard. It's to the point where I keep thinking to myself, when I play Winston, I could just be doing more on Diva. I have half as many hours that I do, probably like a third of the hours on Diva that I do have on Winston, but I keep thinking to myself, man, I could just be doing so much more on Diva. I could be doing so much more on Diva. So I'm running more Brawl or Dive. Probably more Dive, I would say. Yeah. Yeah, probably more Dive. I know I'm slightly worried about like the uses of the like those words of like Brawl, Dive, Poke. Since okay, I didn't even want to be in there. There's a lot of like different sort of interpretations on what exactly each of them mean. I know that there was like the people used to like argue there's a difference between like Brawl and Rush, and like there's a difference between Poke and Spam. I don't really the terminology in Overwatch has never really been as concrete as I think that it is in other games, or it should be here. Which is why I use words very loosely, and I try to focus more on being a bit more wordy with explaining concepts, rather than just throwing terms around and hoping that people know exactly what the terms mean. But let's get into another hero. What have we not covered yet? Soldier. Soldier's an interesting one. Soldier, I'm going to be put a little bit more towards, they got no utility, dog. It's just another like sort of like hyperflex between like mobility and raw numbers, specing a little bit more into the mobility rather than the raw numbers, because you're able to sustain yourself on the angles a lot, as well as you just shoot and run. That's his entire gimmick. You shoot and run. You don't boop, you don't stun, you don't do anything, you just shoot and run. And that's awesome. Fine by me. I'm happy with that. That's why Soldier is fairly good in ranked, and they only get kind of like, it only gets really, really difficult for Soldier to be played when they're outclassed in either their shooting or their running consistently. But right now they're fairly balanced with the rest of the cast in their shooting and their running. So since they're able to pull from both of those value sources fairly consistently, Soldier's a very, very good hero, especially in ranked right now. But next hero, let's talk about what maybe outclasses Soldier sometimes in competitive play. Emere. Emere is going to be kind of another somewhat generalist hero, but going to be leaning a bit more towards the raw numbers as they fucking hurt. They have their mobility of their pistol, which is actually going to be pretty damn good to survive, but it's not going to be anything like a Reaper teleport or like Soldier run ability. Their utility of their grenades is really strong, but not necessarily game changing. But they're gonna shoot good. They're gonna shoot damn good, and that's awesome. Fine by me. I think Emere is overtuned right now, primarily in their mobility. I think that if we take away a little bit of, well, it's really, really hard because hit scans in general right now are really hard to find value out of because mobility creep has been so prevalent in the game for a while, and more heroes are kind of leaning more and more towards the mobility value source. That's harder to get value out of the raw numbers heroes, which makes things really, really difficult sometimes, which kind of leads me to Domina, who is going to be fucking raw numbers town. Domina does have a bit of utility in the form of their shield to provide helpful shooting for their team, as well as AoE like damage to deny angles, and their stun or boop with their sort of slam. And it's not going to be nearly as much value as a lot of other tanks leaning into a bit more of utility abilities, like a Roadhog's chain hook. You're not going to be nearly as dependent on your CD or your utility as Domina comparative to like the Roadhog's chain hook, but you just shoot your gun. Instead of run and shoot, you just shield and shoot. Do you think that the ability to burst something makes a hero better? Burst mobility, burst healing, burst damage? Yes, burst damage especially. Burst damage is insane. Burst damage is actually going to like kind of take some more raw numbers and put them a bit more towards utility, and that's why Widowmaker is so prevalent in this utility role. Any hero with a bunch of burst damage can be a lot is a bit more of like a threat and something you need to consider a little bit more whenever you're like playing or planning your game. So while previously in like Overwatch 1 is going to be the example that I use, Echo didn't have the most insane amount of raw numbers. They had the best like burst damage in the entire game. So they're going to be very, very useful with their mobility, and their burst damage should be playing for that sort of like quote unquote dive playstyle that a lot of people leaned into in Overwatch 1. While you wouldn't be playing Echo in like a huge like raw stat check comp, because there would just be better options. There'd be like a Doomfist when they're on DPS, or like Cassidy, like Maze, Symmetra, whatever. Like Echo is going, actually we can put Echo on the list now. Nowadays, Echo is fairly good at a lot of different things, but speccing mainly into the raw numbers and mobility rather than some of her actual like utility. Primarily in the raw numbers, as they are going to be a very, very deadly shooter. They're going to be able to pump in a lot of damage over time, as well as be a threat with their big like stickies and their burst damage being like something to consider whenever you're playing against an Echo. But primarily it's going to just be like a huge raw numbers hero with a good amount of mobility as well. They don't have that much actual self-sustain, but they actually be a little bit more towards like mobility like that. Yeah, something like that. But she is going to be fairly strong right now, and that kind of will put me, I just saw the, let's get this one out of the way. I've made it fairly clear on my channel, I do not like Venture. Venture's one of my least played heroes in the game, and maybe there's a good chance that once I start actively playing Venture, I'll actually really enjoy them. I dislike Venture's design for a few reasons, where they are another very good generalist hero. And it sucks. There's cool generalist heroes, and then there are the lame ones. And it all matters in how they actually play for their value in their generalizations. So Venture is able to pull value from their mobility and taking space on the map. They're able to make themselves invulnerable and still interact with the map, which I think is insane, through their burrow. As well as they have really good raw numbers, especially once they get the covered in dirt, where every time they melee somebody, they gain a bunch of shields, and I dislike that very strongly, and they gain a bunch of shields every time that they hit a button or breathe. And it's going to make their raw numbers trades really good. Their mobility is able to keep up with a lot of different heroes on the map. Their utility is insane because they're able to displace people quite a bit with their drill dash, and even being able to boot people while they're buried under the ground. It's just kind of insane. Venture can do everything, and it's not in the cool way that I really like, that like a kind of a Winston can, or who are other generalist heroes. I fuck with Torb, I fuck with Symmetra, I fuck with Winston. I do not fuck with Venture, nor Diva. Kiriko, I have design-wise, I'm not the biggest fan of Venture, but they are very strong as long as their numbers are decent. They're going to be outclassed somewhat nowadays in various different sort of comps, like they're going to just be turbo checked by a Bastion or a Mauga, but they're able to be played in a lot of different areas and in a lot of different maps because they can do a bunch of different things. Good Venture player feels like a raid boss sometimes. It's really silly since they are a flex DPS character. Yes, I agree. I very much agree. 414. This is taking a bit longer than I thought. I forgot how many fucking heroes are in the game. Okay. I'm gonna start going through these a little bit faster so we can get a few games in before I potentially have to go. Freja is going to be really good with their raw numbers and their mobility, but they're going to have a decent bit of utility as well. It's mainly their raw numbers that is going to be really strong, but they're going to have a decent bit of utility based off of like the positions that they're actually able to take, as well as or not, that's the mobility. They're able to find a good bit of utility based off of like the actual like explosion damage and the, what's it called? Bola. Her Bola charges really fast, and she actually has perks that allow her, or the passive that allows her to farm her Bola even faster. Next here, Hanzo. That is Numbers McGee. And we'll get into Numbers Numbers. Oh, I forgot that's a bad. I've been calling him Cassie for a while. I was gonna say Numbers McCree, but that was like an old. Oh my god, that was an old name that linked into my head when I said Numbers McGee. It came out. Hanzo's going to be really good at just raw numbers and just shooting people down because they're very strong in just their raw damage, as well as the utility that they provide through the information with their Sonic Arrow is going to be something to consider as well. Sonic Arrow and the ability to bounce their shots can be a very strong tool for teams, and you'll see a lot of the times on Circuit Royale or Junkertown, when pro players are playing those sort of maps where there's going to be super long sightlines, you're going to have a Hanzo, despite there might be other heroes that are able to do a little bit more damage, provide more raw numbers, because if you're playing Hanzo Widowmaker, the utility of the Sonic Arrow is going to provide a lot of information which will help out your Widowmaker's duels significantly. If the enemy team has a Widowmaker, or if you have wall hacks on a specific corner that you know people are going to be peeking, it is insanely valuable utility that Hanzo is able to provide that other heroes would not be able to. Which kind of leads me to a hero that might be able to do a bit more damage of Sierra. Where Sierra is going to be very kind of raw numbers based from my knowledge. I don't have that much experience playing Sierra. Actually, it's going to be kind of here. Where Sierra is able to, they do a shit ton of damage, but it's more difficult to hit and because it's a projectile and the pattern that it sprays in is going to be kind of hard to actually follow up with. But if they hit their tracking shot, they're able to pump in a lot of the damage significantly, and their charges or their grenades are going to be pretty decent utility and disruption to sort of chase down low HP targets from a distance without having to commit their own mobility cooldown, which would be the anchor drone, as well as the boop is going to allow sort of longer fights to happen because it's pushing people away from those close range exchanges that they might want. Realistically, why is Zen based on raw number? Damage when it's Discord is mainly a piece of util that makes him a good character. The thing about the Zenyatta's util is Zenyatta's like Discord orb is it enables your team to do more damage, yes, and it is a form of utility, but it is still just most of the time it's being used is going to be in the raw numbers trade, where if the enemy tank is committed into a space and you have your Discord for them, you chunk. Effectively, you just take out 30% of their HP instantly. It just does 30% of the HP pool in terms of like damage. And it's why I put Zenyatta towards the raw damage corner or raw numbers corner, because their utility of the Discord orb will come in the way of just doing more damage, doing more numbers, while a lot of other utility will be kind of negating sort of mobility or other people's raw numbers rather than enabling your team to do raw numbers yourself. While I agree that the Discord and the healing orb are utility, that's why I have Zenyatta a little bit not in the far bottom corner of raw numbers. Most of their kit is going to just come from helping out their team do better numbers, as well as they have the most damage per second in the support cast, kind of by far, while having very little mobility, almost no mobility, and not that much actual like utility to provide for their team compared to other ones, where a tracer with a pylon on an angle is going to be a lot scarier than a tracer with a Zenyatta orb on an angle. The utility that Illari would provide is going to be a little bit more helpful at controlling that space than like a Harmony orb would be. But that leads me to a hero that might be a little bit harder to identify. Mercy, who's going to be a fairly mobile-based hero, and I think maybe even a bit more into utility. Their raw numbers aren't actually that bad. They're able to heal quite a bit. They're able to damage, or like the damage boost of their utility is pretty damn good, but mainly damage boost is going to be able to, or mainly going to be used to push threshold, which will push some Mercy a bit more into the utility category, as well as res being available to just bring people back from the dead is an insane utility. Dare I say probably one of the strongest, but it's very counterable because of the sort of micro and how it's actually enacted. But Mercy is going to be able to find most of their value through these two sources. I'm going to lean them a little bit away from raw numbers actually, so I'm remembering where Mercy's generally played. But it's going to be Mercy's going to be playing mainly for their mobility or their utility, enabling their team primarily, and their mobility to sort of take space and pull attention on other directions or other places of the map that the enemy team might not want to be looking at as much, while she's still able to sustain herself. But that gets me into Ana, who is going to be another somewhat flexible hero, but is going to be speccing primarily between the utility and the raw numbers rather than any mobility. Ana has 0 mobility, but it's still going to be prevalent in a lot of metas because they're very, very balanced between finding value out of their utility, where sometimes if the utility, you'll see a lot of pro Ana players recognize that they're not going to win like through raw number trades. Their value isn't going to be coming from their raw numbers. It's going to come from their nade. If they hit a big ass nade, they're going to win the fight. So you'll see Ana's running into the enemy team, just suicide nading, because that is all of the value that they're able to provide with their kit, and it's damn good value. But in other instances where you're going to be able to win longer term fights, you're going to lean a bit more towards the raw numbers sort of playstyle and playing for your raw numbers as Ana, as you also kind of like outclass a lot of other heroes or other supports in that way. While it's not the biggest raw numbers based hero, like Baptiste is going to be able to provide a little bit more healing than Ana. Ana is going to be able to provide a bit more utility consistently than like a Baptiste would or a Juno would. What next hero? Who have we not done yet? We did venture Vendetta. Vendetta is a very interesting hero, and if I have the time, I'd like to make a video about them somewhat soon. But Vendetta is also going to be a very good generalist hero, and I know that is a hot take. And hear me out now. Vendetta is not the strongest right now, but they were previously, because just like every other generalist hero, as soon as their numbers aren't as good, or they start to get outclassed in all of the different fields, or different fields, they kind of start sucking really bad. Vendetta was very dominant for a while because they're able to do and provide a lot, probably leaning a little bit away from utility and more so into the mobility and raw numbers, since I don't think that in 5v5 specifically, the displacement that Vendetta would give to their team is actually all that much, but they were finding a lot of value through their mobility and their raw numbers. Since once the Vendetta got into a close range brawl, they were going to be one of the biggest damage dealers in the game in some of the previous patches. But nowadays, as their damage got nerfed and a lot of their sort of thresholds got pushed to the point where they're not able to find kills consistently, Vendetta is going to be a lot weaker. Though as a hero, they're still able to find value out of all three corners of the game, or out of the three value sources. Which will make it so that as soon as they're outclassed in some of the value sources, why not just play something else? If you're going to be playing for a raw frontline brawly or number trade, then why not just play like a Reaper? Yeah, it's like a here. Or something that's going to help you spec a bit more into the raw numbers. If you're going to be playing more for your utility or disruption, there are better heroes to do that. If you're going to or like a venture to do that. If you're going to be playing more for your mobility and you want to be just kind of controlling space, why not just play Tracer? But as soon as Vendetta's numbers and survivability is a little bit too good, they just can do everything really well. Ven is able to stop Ryan Pin, and when I say stop Ryan Pin, and when I say thing, imagine me as a guy doing ASMR for like ripping your heart out and such. How is Venture nearly in the middle? Venture's in the middle because they are able to play through a lot of different value sources in a variety of different games. Sometimes they're going to be able to play for their disruptions and pushing people into like a team's sightlines, or denying enemy teams plays with their boop, with their drill dash. They have really, really good raw numbers and are able to stat check a lot of heroes, as well as they have very good mobility, getting their mobility based CDs like their drill dash back faster through their dig. What heroes have we not covered yet? Zarya. There's so many damn heroes in this game. Zarya, yet again, going to be a bit more of a generalist hero, and especially with their minor perk being the one that provides them the extra jump, that was super underrated. And then once it was one of the things I felt vindicated about when other people started picking the jump perk, and I'm like, ha! I was right all along. Zarya is mainly going to be spec'd into the utility and the raw numbers. Primarily, you're going to be seeing Zarya used in a lot of metas where your utility will enable something like a Vendetta to be getting their value off consistently, while you're also farming up. Every time that you're getting successful bubbles and enabling teammates to do stuff, you're going to be farming your own raw numbers with your charge. So what this means is that your raw numbers you're going to be able to stat check a good amount of tanks with your raw numbers, but most of your value and why Zarya is played in a lot of different metas is going to come from your utility, but you're able to derive your value from either one of these as time sort of goes or like as different games get played. It'll depend on what you need to be playing for more, depending on the matchup and who's on your team, who's on the enemy team. Since if you don't have a bubble target, then it's going to be much harder to derive value from the utility source of value, since you're not able to enable anyone. So you need to be playing for your raw numbers and enabling yourself, which a lot of the time people will see and realize that it might just be better to play something else that can spec a bit more into the raw numbers aspects or the raw numbers category. It'd be like that. Next here, Sigma. Interesting. I'm going to do Ryan last because that'll segue into our games really well, but I might be running out of time here. Sigma can kind of do a lot, mainly going to be speccing into this other far right side of the utility and the raw numbers. Sigma has very little mobility, only gaining slight amounts of mobility once they have their float perk, which is their major, if I remember correctly. Yes, which is going to be their only form of mobility, but aside from that, they're going to be able to slowly poke down a lot of different heroes over time. And they have a lot of utility to enable them to do so. They are able to put their shield on an angle to make it so mobility-based heroes aren't able to kind of play as much. They have their rock to stun people. I think they actually might lean a bit more towards utility than raw numbers. I think it's like that. I'm kind of getting cramped here. I mean, this is what most people are going to flock to, since it's hard for most players to find value out of mobility. So it makes sense that most of the game's casts are going to be put over here, and why a lot of more traditionally like quote unquote hard heroes are going to be based in the mobility categories. Sigma can ult for mobility, true. Well, a quick little thing that I want to mention, how you necessarily want to be playing for your value in some of these changes based off of heroes. And all of these heroes won't have exactly the same play styles as one another. Where, let's say Bastion, while they want to be playing for a lot of like really big raw numbers, is going to be doing so in bursts. They're going to have the best numbers in bursts rather than a Domina or a Hanzo. Hanzo's a better example, or a Sigma, who while they still want to be playing for raw numbers, Hanzo and Sigma want to be doing it over time, while a Bastion would want to be doing it in sort of like big bursts. How you execute your value and what ideas you're playing for to get the value out of your kit changes based off of your heroes and the sort of nuanced ideas of how you want to play them. But how, like, still being able to play for raw numbers is really, really important. Maybe I could make it bigger, like, or more complicated shape to sort of show all of those intricacies. That'd be an interesting little project if I have time. But for the most part, they're still going to play for the same sources of value, but how you execute them is going to be a little bit different. I did Hazard, I did Diva, I did Doomfist. I think I did all the tanks now. No, I did not do Junkrat, Queen, or Reinhardt. DPS, I did not do Pharah, Ashe, Sojourn. So let's start with Pharah. With Pharah, it's going to be another fairly generalist hero, and that's why they're going to be so insanely dominant sometimes and then pretty weak other times. Speccing a little bit more into the mobility side of things, and potentially a bit more raw number. Pharah does have a good bit of utility with their conk, or what's actually called concussive blast. Being able to boot people into good spots, but the reason why she became so dominant recently is because you're actually able to start doing damage with your concussive blast, because it's really, really hard in 5v5 especially to be getting consistent value out of these sort of like boot-based utility, and especially longer cooldowns like that one being like 7 seconds. It was mainly used as a way to move around the map, and then giving the Pharah the option to put more raw numbers into a team or into a game, especially with that burst, was going to be very, very valuable. But Pharah can be pulling from any of these value sources in the game. That's why they're going to be really dominant sometimes and somewhat weak other times. Ashe. Ashe is a really interesting one, but they're going to be leaning a little bit more into the sort of raw numbers and a little bit of utility. The utility that Ashe provides, it's actually gonna be like that. The utility that Ashe provides is going to be the coach gun that she has, and the dynamite. Dynamite is going to be also helping with the raw numbers, but it also will enable heroes like Mauga or Anran, or just generally being able to burst people from places that you might not necessarily be able to see, or around corners is going to be very, very strong. It can deny a lot of angles as well, because if you know somebody's on an angle, but you can't necessarily go fight it exactly or peek it, you can just throw a dynamite over there and deny that play that they would be going for. Coach gun going to be a very more direct form of denial, as well as a bit of mobility for her. It can be used in either way. I'm going to slaughter in like right there. Coach gun is able to be used in either a mobility way or a utility, but you're very rarely going to be finding value with the raw numbers of it. It only does, I guess it does 90 damage, but it's a shotgun, so it's going to be hard to hit every bullet. But the main draw of Ashe is going to be absolutely her raw numbers, being able to pump in a bunch of damage over time comparative to a lot of the other casts. But also leads me to Sojourn, the biggest generalist hero in the hit scan category. Having mobility with their slide, they have utility with their slow, being able to deny a lot of angles, as well as you're able to spec it towards the raw numbers, and then the raw numbers to just straight up do damage. You just do a bunch of damage on Sojourn as well. So another very hyper generalist hero. You can do kind of everything on Sojourn. You can play for any sort of value source that you would want. Your utility with your slow is primarily going to be making sure that people aren't able to take angles around you, but also with the slow field, if you want to be leaning a little bit more into utility, or if you're in a matchup like a big brawl where utility could be valuable, then that perk choice is going to be really, really, really strong, as now you're able to generally slow people a bit more with your disruptor shot. I keep calling it slow because I learned Sojourn when she first came out, when it actually just did slow on base kit. But I mean, like, you can only slow after you get that first perk. But if you're leaning more into the raw damage side of things, then you could just be picking the overcharge perk, if that's where you think you're going to be finding most of your value in a matchup or in a map. And I think that's all of the DPS. Cassidy. I did not do Cassidy yet. Now Cassidy is going to have very little mobility, but derive almost all of their value from raw numbers and utility. Their flashbang is going to be a really, really useful tool in denying a lot of mobility-based heroes like Tracer, Winston, WreckingBall, etc. The flashbang is going to be really, really strong at denying those forms of value from the enemy team. While they can't exactly enable anything else, but that is going to be a very, very strong utility. They have very slight amounts of mobility with their combat roll, but it's basically nothing comparative to the rest of the game. But the main draw of Cassidy is going to be just a raw fucking damage. If you get in close to mid-range against a Cassidy, it's going to be one of the higher DPS heroes in terms of like raw number output. So you're going to be deriving most of your value through the raw number, but sometimes if you're going to be playing something like a Hanzo who specs even more into the raw numbers, but you're struggling to stay alive, or mobility-based heroes are just kind of running you down, you can be adding a bit of utility to your gameplay while you're still playing mainly for the raw numbers. Your utility can deny any mobility value that the enemy team is forced or trying to play for, and let you farm your numbers a lot more, even if you do theoretically less damage than like a Hanzo would. Moira. I still need to do Moira. Did I do Brig? Be crazy if I didn't do Brig. Okay, I think it's just Moira and Reinhardt. Moira, Reinhardt, Queen. Yes. Damn, we're almost done. Okay. Moira. This is the hero that I'm probably likely to be most wrong about. I will say that now. I don't understand Moira as in depth in 5v5 and in Overwatch 2 as I did in like Overwatch 1. I don't know what value sources they necessarily play for nowadays, but I imagine it looks a little something like this, where Moira's main strength is going to be primarily, maybe like this. Moira's main strength is going to be her fade cooldown, which will allow her to take a lot of sort of aggressive positioning and be safe while doing so, and pulling attention away from spots that the enemy team might want to be looking for on the map. But you also have a good amount of like raw numbers that you're able to provide for team, and then your orb to chase down low HP targets can also be a fairly good form of utility, or throwing your orb onto an angle to sort of deny any flankers or plays that might want to be hitting your backline. So I think Moira would be speccing a bit more into the mobility and raw numbers, but with a little bit of utility, but I could be wrong about that. And then that covers our supports. Now, Junker Queen. I love Junker Queen. And they're going to be looking kind of like this. Yeah, I think that's a perfect little slot for Junker Queen. Junker Queen's utility is going to be extremely strong, and it's kind of putting, or the constant threat of a displacement with your knife pulling people closer to make it easier for you to get value through your actual numbers, as well as your ultimate ability putting an anti-effect onto everyone, making it hard for people to heal, denying any healing plays that are being made by the enemies. Though you have very little mobility, the main thing being in just the form of your shout. But your shout is going to be on a 12-second cooldown, so it's going to be hard to actually utilize properly and play for very large amounts of mobility. But your raw numbers are going to be very good. It might actually be here. I think Junker Queen fits. I find for the most part that Junker Queen gets most of their value in most games through their raw numbers, but also their ability to sustain themselves through their healing. And it's why I feel so passionately, and most of the time, that you are actually going, like, I feel very strongly that Battle Shout is a really, really strong perk that Junker Queen players often overlook, and they go for the Rampant Charge instead, because Battle Shout is going to enable you to spec even more into the raw numbers, and it increases your uptime and how much you're able to shoot significantly, and it allows you to maintain being a threat anytime that you might hit a knife to open up the game. Most of the time, it's Junker Queen, because they have very little mobility, or like any like sort of like cheat abilities like the overrun that Mauga has, to get their raw numbers value or get their like actual damage onto the enemy team. The main way you're going to be opening fights is through your knife utility. So if you hit a knife onto somebody, dragging them closer, you're going to be able to actually put your numbers towards their team in a really nice and simple way. So Junker Queen will kind of combo their utility into the raw numbers in a way that will make it so she's a very, very fun and fairly balanced hero, because you're able to counter her raw numbers, you're able to counter her utility, but she's going to be really, really fun. And I personally think balanced. I think that's probably one of the best heroes that Overwatch 2 has added in the game since Overwatch 1 ended. I love Junker Queen. But leads us to our last hero for the list, and this took a bit longer than I thought, so I think I can get one game in if the queue is fast. But the last hero we'll be talking about on our list is Reinhardt. And let me, before we actually get into talking about Reinhardt, let me hit this button. Time's at 4:40. Yeah, okay. Reinhardt is going to be a hero that is really bad right now. Really, really bad compared to almost every other tank. Why they are bad is because every way that they can execute their value of raw numbers, I guess they are kind of like here-ish. They're going to be not as strong in terms of raw numbers as a lot of other heroes, though they are going to have a lot of numbers over time, being able to regenerate their shield. Their mobility is going to be easily stopped by other utility, as well as their mobility or their utility of actually being able to shield people is not nearly as beneficial as it once was in Overwatch 1, because everyone has some kind of their own mobility nowadays, where they're not going to need to sit behind a shield nearly as often. Reinhardt is going to be a very difficult hero to find value out of right now, because while they're so specced into this raw numbers, it's hard. It's very, 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 very hard to execute finding the value out of those raw numbers. You can find some value out of your utility of like pin and whatnot. Your pin and your earth shatter and your potential boops are going to be very good to actually enable some plays that you might want to be making. But Reinhardt, while they spec towards raw numbers, they're going to have almost no tools to actually use them effectively, and there are going to be too many ways to shut down the positions that Reinhardt needs to be. The way that you need to win on Reinhardt and almost any sort of raw numbers, you're going to see specific aspects of value sources. There are going to be concepts in the game that are going to be more important for you to understand if you want to be making and finding value as a player. So with raw number based heroes, you're going to see positioning is very, very important, because if you are not in a spot where you can be stat checking others, if you're not in a spot where you can actually play for your raw numbers value, you are not going to be able to find any of the value that your hero really leans into. Utility, it's a little bit more dependent on what your utility is, and mobility, you're going to see a lot of the time, if you're not moving around and pulling people into threatening positions, you're not going to be effectively winning a lot of games. So recently I have been struggling in every sort of aspect of my play and every sort of hero that I need to play for my team. My positioning has been a very big issue. My rotations and my pathing that I take have been a very, very rough aspect of my gameplay. So I've wanted to one-trick Reinhardt for a while to try and fix it. So the only way that we are going to be able to win consistently on Reinhardt is if we get our positioning and our rotations really good.